This audiobook, Interview Mastery, The Hidden Psychology of Getting Hired, was written and created by Audiobook Mantra. This is not a guide about memorizing answers. It is not a list of scripted responses, and it is not about pretending to be someone you are not. This audiobook is about understanding the psychological forces that determine whether someone trusts you, respects you, and ultimately chooses you. Because every interview is not merely a test of your qualifications. It is a test of your psychology. It is a test of your emotional stability. It is a test of your presence. It is a test of whether you appear certain or uncertain. Most people believe interviews are decided by experience, but experience alone rarely determines the outcome. What determines the outcome is perception, how you are perceived, how you are felt, how you are remembered. And perception is shaped long before you finish answering your first question. It is shaped in silence. It is shaped in composure. It is shaped in the invisible signals you communicate without speaking. This audiobook will teach you how to control those signals, not through manipulation, but through awareness. Because the person who controls their internal state controls the interview. Introduction: the moment everything is decided. There is a moment in every interview when the decision is already being made. It does not happen at the end. It does not happen after you answer every question. It does not happen when you walk out of the room. It happens much earlier, sometimes within the first few seconds, sometimes before you even speak. Because interviews are not logical processes first. They are psychological processes first. The human brain does not begin by analyzing your qualifications. It begins by analyzing your stability, your posture, your eye contact, your emotional control, your presence. The brain asks silent questions. Does this person appear calm? Does this person appear confident? Does this person appear certain? Or does this person appear uncertain, nervous, reactive, seeking approval? These questions are not asked consciously, they are asked automatically. Because the brain evolved to detect stability in others. Stability signals reliability. Reliability signals safety. Safety determines trust, and trust determines hiring decisions. Before your skills are evaluated, your psychology is evaluated. Most candidates never realize this. They prepare answers. They memorize responses. They study technical knowledge, but they neglect the most important factor, their internal state. Because your internal state determines your external signals. If your internal state is unstable, your signals will reveal instability. If your internal state is calm, your signals will reveal stability. And stability creates advantage. The candidate who appears calm under pressure immediately stands out, not because they speak more, but because they react less. Not because they try harder, but because they remain stable. Most candidates unknowingly sabotage themselves. They react to pressure. They rush their answers. They speak to relieve their anxiety. They attempt to convince the interviewer of their value, but persuasion rarely works in interviews. Perception does. The interviewer is not merely listening to your answers. They are observing your behavior. They are observing your composure. They are observing your emotional control. They are observing how you respond to uncertainty. Because uncertainty is inevitable in interviews, unexpected questions, moments of silence, moments where you do not know the perfect answer. These moments reveal your psychology. They reveal whether you remain stable or whether you become reactive. Most candidates fear these moments because uncertainty creates discomfort. Discomfort creates emotional activation. Emotional activation creates reactive behavior. Reactive behavior weakens authority. Authority is not established through perfect answers. Authority is established through emotional control. The candidate who remains calm under pressure creates psychological advantage instantly because calm signals certainty. Certainty signals competence. Competence signals trustworthiness. Trustworthiness signals hireability. This chain begins internally, not externally. You do not need to appear perfect. You need to appear stable. Stability communicates everything. The interviewer needs to feel confident choosing you, because hiring decisions are not made purely on logic. They are made on emotional certainty. The interviewer must feel certain about you, not just think positively about you. Feel certain. Feeling creates decisions. Logic justifies decisions after they are made. Most candidates attempt to influence logic. Powerful candidates influence feeling. They influence feeling through presence, through restraint, through calm, through silence, through emotional control. This creates the psychological edge, because the calmest candidate in the room is perceived as the most capable, not necessarily because they know more, but because they appear more certain. Certainty creates authority. Authority creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. This audiobook will teach you how to develop this certainty. Not artificial certainty, but genuine internal stability. Stability that cannot be shaken by pressure. Stability that cannot be disrupted by uncertainty. Stability that communicates competence without forcing it. You will learn how to control your internal state before the interview begins. How to remain calm during difficult questions. How to use silence to increase perceived confidence. How to avoid the psychological mistakes that cause candidates to appear weak. How to create the perception of authority naturally. Because interview mastery is not about saying the perfect words. It is about controlling the invisible signals beneath the words. Signals that determine how you are perceived. Signals that determine whether you are trusted. Signals that determine whether you are chosen. Because the interview is not won by the most qualified candidate. It is won by the most psychologically stable candidate, and psychological stability can be mastered. This is Interview Mastery, Chapter 1. Why most qualified candidates still fail interviews. There is a silent frustration shared by millions of people. They prepare, they study, they gain experience, they develop skills, they earn qualifications, and yet, when the interview arrives, they fail, not because they are incapable, not because they are unqualified, but because something invisible undermines them, something they cannot see, something they do not understand. They leave the interview replaying every moment in their mind, wondering what went wrong. They remember their answers, they remember their preparation, they remember their effort, and none of it explains the outcome, because the failure did not occur in their words, it occurred in their psychology. Most candidates enter interviews believing they must prove their competence. This belief creates pressure. Pressure creates emotional activation. Emotional activation creates subtle behavioral changes, changes they do not notice, but changes the interviewer detects instantly. Their breathing becomes faster. Their voice becomes less steady. Their responses become rushed. Their mind begins seeking approval instead of expressing certainty. This shift is subtle, but its impact is profound, because interviews are not purely informational exchanges. They are emotional evaluations. The interviewer is not just asking, "Can this person do the job?" They are asking something deeper. Can I trust this person? Trust is not built through information alone. Trust is built through emotional signals. Signals of stability, signals of calm, signals of certainty. When a candidate appears emotionally reactive, uncertainty emerges, not necessarily conscious uncertainty, but subconscious uncertainty. The interviewer may not consciously think, "This candidate seems unstable," but they feel it, and feeling determines decision, because human beings evolved to trust emotional stability. Emotional stability signals reliability. Reliability signals safety. Safety determines selection. Most candidates unintentionally signal emotional instability, not because they lack ability, but because they are internally seeking approval. Seeking creates subtle behavioral patterns. Patterns the nervous system of the interviewer detects automatically. Seeking approval changes posture. It changes tone. It changes pacing. It changes presence. Presence becomes weaker, not visibly weak, but psychologically weaker. Authority disappears. Certainty disappears. Influence disappears, all without a single wrong answer. Because interview success is not determined by correctness alone, it is determined by perception. And perception is shaped by emotional signals. There is another invisible factor, fear of loss. Most candidates enter interviews fearing rejection. Fear creates defensive psychology. Defensive psychology creates protective behavior. Protective behavior weakens authority, because authority does not defend itself unnecessarily. Authority exists without justification. Candidates who fear rejection attempt to prevent rejection through persuasion. They explain excessively. They elaborate unnecessarily. They attempt to convince the interviewer of their worth. But persuasion often produces the opposite effect, because persuasion signals uncertainty. It signals that the candidate does not fully believe in their own value. Confidence does not persuade aggressively. Confidence states calmly. Confidence allows silence. Confidence does not chase approval. Confidence assumes worth. This assumption changes perception, because emotional certainty communicates competence more powerfully than verbal explanation ever can. There is also the problem of overcompensation. Candidates who feel internal insecurity attempt to compensate externally. They speak more, they explain more, they attempt to demonstrate knowledge excessively. But excessive demonstration signals internal instability. Internal instability weakens authority. Authority emerges from emotional containment, not emotional output. The candidate who speaks with restraint appears more confident because restraint signals internal control. Internal control signals competence. Competence signals trustworthiness. Trustworthiness signals higher ability. This entire chain begins internally, not externally. Another common mistake occurs in moments of uncertainty. When candidates encounter difficult questions, their emotional state shifts. They become anxious. They attempt to answer immediately. They fear silence. But silence is not weakness. Silence is strength. Silence allows emotional regulation. Silence allows cognitive clarity. Silence allows deliberate response. Candidates who rush their answers signal emotional reactivity. Reactivity weakens authority. Candidates who pause signal emotional stability. Stability strengthens authority. Authority influences perception. Perception determines outcome. The difference between these two candidates is not intelligence, it is emotional discipline. Emotional discipline allows silence. Silence allows stability. Stability allows influence. Influence allows success. There is also the factor of internal identity. Candidates who see themselves as needing the job behave differently than candidates who see themselves as choosing the job. Need creates psychological dependency. Dependency weakens authority. Choice creates psychological independence. Independence strengthens authority. Authority influences perception immediately. The interviewer senses dependency subconsciously. Dependency creates doubt, not logical doubt. Emotional doubt. Emotional doubt weakens trust. Trust determines hiring. Candidates who embody choice psychology appear stronger, not because they are arrogant, but because they are emotionally independent. Emotional independence signals stability. Stability signals reliability. Reliability signals competence. Competence signals higher ability. This entire structure is psychological, not informational. Most candidates attempt to win interviews through information. Powerful candidates win interviews through psychology. They regulate their internal state. They control their emotional signals. They remain calm under pressure. They do not chase approval. They allow silence. They respond deliberately. They embody certainty. This certainty influences perception automatically, because emotional stability is rare. And rarity attracts attention. Attention influences decision. This is why most qualified candidates fail, not because they lack competence, but because they lack emotional control. They prepare externally, but neglect internal preparation. Interview mastery begins internally, not externally, because the person who controls their internal state controls how they are perceived, and the person who controls perception controls the outcome. Chapter 2. The Psychology of First Impressions. How hiring decisions begin before you speak. Before you answer a single question. Before you explain your experience. Before you attempt to prove your competence. The interview has already begun. Not when you sit down. Not when you introduce yourself. But the moment you are seen. Human beings form impressions instantly. This process is automatic. It does not require conscious thought. It does not require deliberate analysis. It happens beneath awareness. The brain evaluates emotional stability faster than it evaluates information, because emotional stability determines safety. Safety determines trust. Trust determines openness. And openness determines whether the interviewer is psychologically willing to accept you. This evaluation happens within seconds, sometimes within fractions of a second, long before you attempt to influence the outcome through words. Most candidates never realize this. They believe the interview begins when they start speaking. But the interview begins when they are observed. Your posture communicates immediately. Your pace communicates immediately. Your eye movement communicates immediately. Your emotional state communicates immediately, not consciously, but subconsciously. The interviewer's nervous system detects these signals automatically. It asks silent questions. Is this person calm? Is this person certain? Is this person stable? Or is this person anxious? Reactive? Uncertain? These signals shape perception instantly, and perception shapes interpretation. If the interviewer perceives you as stable, your answers are interpreted positively. If the interviewer perceives you as unstable, your answers are interpreted cautiously. This happens even if your answers are logically correct, because logic follows emotion. Emotion determines openness. Openness determines acceptance. Acceptance determines outcome. This is why first impressions are so powerful, not because they are always accurate, but because they shape everything that follows. Once an emotional impression is formed, the brain begins seeking confirmation. This process is called psychological confirmation. If the interviewer perceives calm confidence, they begin looking for evidence of competence. If the interviewer perceives anxiety, they begin looking for evidence of weakness, not intentionally, but automatically. This confirmation bias influences interpretation. The same answer can be interpreted differently depending on emotional perception. This is why emotional control at the beginning of the interview is critical, because emotional signals establish the frame. The frame shapes interpretation. Interpretation shapes outcome. Most candidates unintentionally sabotage their first impression. They enter with internal tension. They attempt to hide it. But emotional tension cannot be fully concealed. It appears subtly, in breathing patterns, in posture rigidity, in eye movement, in micro-expressions. These signals are detected automatically, not consciously, but emotionally. The interviewer may not consciously think, "This candidate seems anxious," but their nervous system senses instability. Instability creates doubt. Doubt weakens trust. Trust determines hiring decisions. There is another powerful factor involved: emotional contagion. Human beings synchronize emotionally. If you are calm, others begin feeling calm. If you are anxious, others begin feeling subtle tension. This synchronization happens automatically, without conscious awareness. Your internal state becomes the emotional environment of the interaction. If you project calm stability, the interviewer feels calm. Calm increases trust. Trust increases openness. Openness increases positive perception. Positive perception increases hiring probability. But if you project anxiety, the interviewer feels subtle discomfort. Discomfort creates psychological resistance. Resistance weakens connection. Weak connection reduces hiring probability. This entire process happens before you speak. This is why silence at the beginning of the interview is powerful. Silence allows you to stabilize your internal state. Silence allows emotional regulation. Silence allows presence. Presence communicates authority. Authority communicates competence. Competence communicates hireability. Most candidates attempt to fill silence immediately. They speak too quickly. They attempt to prove themselves prematurely. But premature speech weakens authority. Authority emerges from emotional containment, not emotional output. Candidates who remain calm signal internal control. Internal control signals emotional strength. Emotional strength signals competence. This perception influences the interviewer automatically. There is also the matter of perceived status. Status is not determined solely by external achievements. It is determined by internal stability. Individuals who remain calm under observation appear higher status, not because they demand status, but because they embody emotional independence. Emotional independence signals strength. Strength attracts respect. Respect influences decision. Silence reinforces perceived status, because silence signals emotional self-sufficiency. Self-sufficient individuals do not seek validation. They do not rush to prove themselves. They allow their presence to exist naturally. This creates psychological gravity. Gravity attracts attention. Attention increases perceived importance. Importance influences decision. This entire process occurs without a single word, because communication is not limited to speech. Presence communicates continuously. Emotional signals communicate continuously. Silence communicates continuously. Most candidates attempt to influence through words. Powerful candidates influence through presence. Presence is shaped internally, not externally. It is shaped by emotional regulation. Emotional regulation creates stability. Stability creates authority. Authority shapes perception. Perception shapes outcome. The interview begins long before questions are asked. It begins with observation. It begins with emotional perception. It begins with your internal state. Mastering this moment changes everything, because the candidate who controls their emotional state at the beginning controls how they are perceived, and the candidate who controls perception controls the interview. Chapter 3. Why interviewers trust calm candidates more than perfect candidates. Most candidates believe the interview is a test of perfection. They believe their goal is to answer every question flawlessly, to demonstrate complete knowledge, to avoid mistakes, to eliminate uncertainty. They believe perfection creates trust, but this belief is not entirely true, because trust is not created by perfection. Trust is created by stability, and stability is communicated through calm. The calm candidate holds a psychological advantage that the perfect candidate often loses, because perfection is fragile. Calm is durable. Perfection depends on performance. Calm depends on internal control. When performance falters, perfection collapses, but calm remains intact. Interviewers are not only evaluating what you know, they are evaluating how you respond when you do not know, because every job contains uncertainty, unexpected problems, unexpected pressure, unexpected responsibility. The interviewer is not simply hiring your knowledge. They are hiring your nervous system. They are hiring your emotional stability. They are hiring your ability to remain functional under pressure, because emotional stability determines long-term reliability. Reliability determines trust. Trust determines hiring decisions. A candidate who answers every question correctly but appears emotionally unstable creates subconscious doubt, not logical doubt, but emotional doubt. The interviewer may not consciously recognize it, but they feel it, because emotional signals are processed faster than logical signals. The brain detects instability immediately. It detects tension in the voice. It detects rushed speech. It detects subtle hesitation driven by anxiety. These signals weaken perceived reliability. Reliability is more valuable than perfection, because reliability predicts consistency. Consistency predicts safety. Safety determines hiring. A calm candidate communicates reliability even when they do not have perfect answers, because calm signals emotional regulation. Emotional regulation signals internal control. Internal control signals competence. Competence signals hireability. This is why calm candidates are often chosen over more qualified candidates, not because they know more, but because they appear more stable. Stability creates confidence in the interviewer. Confidence reduces perceived risk. Hiring decisions are fundamentally risk decisions. The interviewer is not only asking, can this person do the job? They are asking, is hiring this person safe? Safety is determined emotionally, not logically. Logic justifies the emotional decision afterward. Most candidates attempt to eliminate risk through persuasion. They try to convince the interviewer of their capability. They try to eliminate doubt through explanation. But persuasion signals uncertainty. True confidence does not attempt to eliminate doubt aggressively. It allows calm presence to communicate certainty naturally. Calm candidates do not rush to answer immediately. They allow silence. Silence communicates thoughtfulness. Thoughtfulness communicates emotional control. Emotional control communicates competence. Competence communicates trustworthiness. Trustworthiness communicates safety. This chain begins with calm, not perfection. There is also a neurological reason calm creates trust. The human nervous system constantly monitors emotional signals in others. This process is called neuroception. It happens automatically, without conscious awareness. Neuroception detects whether someone is safe or unsafe, stable or unstable, reliable or unpredictable. Calm individuals signal safety. Their breathing is steady, their movements are controlled, their voice is stable. These signals reassure the nervous system of the interviewer. Reassurance creates comfort. Comfort creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. Candidates who appear emotionally reactive create subtle threat signals, not obvious threat, but subtle instability. Instability creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates hesitation. Hesitation reduces hiring probability, even if the candidate is logically qualified, because emotional certainty is more influential than logical qualification. This explains why some candidates leave interviews confused. They believe they answered correctly. They believe they demonstrated competence, but they failed to demonstrate stability. Without stability, competence does not create trust. Calm creates trust. Calm signals emotional independence. Emotionally independent individuals do not appear controlled by external pressure. They appear self-regulated. Self-regulation signals strength. Strength signals reliability. Reliability signals hireability. The calm candidate also creates psychological contrast. Most candidates enter interviews with visible internal tension. Their emotional activation is subtle but detectable. The calm candidate stands out immediately, not because they perform dramatically, but because they remain stable. Stability attracts attention. Attention increases perceived importance. Importance increases perceived competence. Perceived competence influences hiring decisions. This effect occurs without conscious awareness, because perception is emotional first, logical second. The calm candidate also appears more authentic, because calm allows natural expression. Emotional reactivity creates artificial behavior. Artificial behavior weakens trust. Authenticity strengthens trust. Trust determines hiring. There is another advantage calm candidates possess. They are not controlled by the interview. They remain in control of themselves. Self-control signals authority. Authority influences perception immediately. Authority does not need to demand respect. It communicates respectworthiness naturally. This does not mean calm candidates are passive. It means they are emotionally disciplined. They regulate their internal state deliberately. They observe before reacting. They respond instead of reacting impulsively. This response pattern signals competence, because competence is associated with emotional control. Emotional control predicts performance under pressure. Performance under pressure determines professional reliability. Professional reliability determines hiring decisions. Interviewers are unconsciously searching for emotional stability, not emotional perfection. Perfection is temporary. Stability is permanent. Stability predicts consistency. Consistency predicts trust. Trust predicts hiring. This is why calm candidates are trusted more than perfect candidates. Because calm communicates something deeper than knowledge. It communicates control. Control over emotion. Control over reaction. Control over self. And the person who controls themselves appears capable of handling anything. This perception creates advantage. This advantage creates trust. This trust creates opportunity. This is the hidden psychology of getting hired. Chapter 4. The silent signals that make interviewers respect you instantly. Respect in interviews is not requested. It is not negotiated. It is not earned through explanation. It is transmitted, silently, instantly, and often unconsciously. Most candidates attempt to earn respect through words. They attempt to demonstrate intelligence. They attempt to demonstrate competence. They attempt to demonstrate preparation. But respect is not granted because of what you say. It is granted because of what you signal. Because long before the interviewer evaluates your qualifications, they evaluate your nervous system. They observe whether you appear emotionally stable, whether you appear grounded, whether you appear internally controlled. These signals are silent, but they are powerful. Because human beings evolved to detect emotional stability automatically. It was once a survival mechanism to determine who could be trusted, who could be relied upon, who could remain calm under pressure. This instinct still operates today, especially in interviews. The interviewer's brain is not just evaluating your answers, it is evaluating your internal state, your stillness, your breathing, your pacing, your reactions. These silent signals shape perception immediately. The candidate who appears emotionally grounded is perceived differently, not because they say more, but because they signal more control. Control signals competence. Competence signals reliability. Reliability signals hireability. Most candidates unknowingly send signals of emotional dependence. They shift constantly. They react quickly. They speak to fill silence. They attempt to prevent judgment. These behaviors reveal internal uncertainty. Uncertainty weakens authority. Authority is not created through effort. It is created through emotional containment. The candidate who can remain still communicates something powerful. They communicate that they are not controlled by the environment. They communicate internal independence. Independence creates respect, because independence signals strength. Strength signals capability. Capability signals hireability. Stillness is one of the most powerful silent signals. Most people move constantly when nervous. Movement releases internal tension, but movement also reveals internal instability. The calm candidate does not attempt to discharge tension through movement. They contain it. This containment signals emotional discipline. Emotional discipline signals authority. Authority creates respect instantly. There is also the signal of pacing. Candidates who rush communicate internal urgency. Urgency signals emotional pressure, Pressure signals lack of control. The calm candidate controls their pace. They speak deliberately. They move deliberately. They respond deliberately. This deliberate pacing signals internal certainty. Certainty commands respect, because certainty signals emotional independence. Independence removes the perception of need. Need weakens authority. The candidate who does not appear needy appears stronger, not because they are arrogant, but because they are emotionally self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency creates psychological gravity. Gravity attracts respect. Another powerful silent signal is comfort with silence. Most candidates fear silence. They interpret silence as danger. They rush to eliminate it. But silence is not danger. Silence is authority. Silence communicates that you are not controlled by discomfort. You do not rush to escape uncertainty. You remain stable within it. This stability commands respect, because emotional resilience is rare. The candidate who allows silence appears more confident, not because they are forcing confidence, but because they are not escaping discomfort. They remain present. Presence is powerful. Presence signals internal control. Internal control signals strength. Strength commands respect. Eye contact also communicates silent signals. Not forced eye contact, not aggressive eye contact, but calm, natural eye contact. Eye contact signals emotional availability without emotional dependence. It communicates openness without submission. This balance creates authority. Authority creates respect. Most candidates either avoid eye contact or force it unnaturally. Both behaviors signal internal instability. Calm candidates allow natural connection. They do not force connection. They do not avoid connection. They remain present. Presence communicates confidence. Confidence commands respect. There is also the signal of emotional neutrality. Candidates who react emotionally to difficult questions weaken their authority. Emotional reaction signals vulnerability. The calm candidate remains emotionally neutral, not cold, not disconnected, but regulated. Regulation signals internal control. Internal control commands respect. Respect emerges naturally, without demand, without persuasion, without effort, because respect is not granted to those who seek it. It is granted to those who embody emotional stability. The interviewer senses this stability. They feel it subconsciously. They trust it automatically, because emotional stability predicts professional stability. Professional stability predicts reliability. Reliability predicts hireability. These silent signals operate continuously, before you speak, while you speak, after you speak. They shape perception constantly. Mastering these signals transforms how you are perceived, not through manipulation, but through emotional discipline, because the candidate who controls their internal state controls the signals they transmit, and the candidate who controls their signals controls how they are respected. Chapter 5. How anxiety silently sabotages even the most prepared candidates. There is a moment before every interview when preparation ends and psychology begins. The candidate has studied. They have reviewed their experience. They have anticipated questions. They have rehearsed answers. Logically, they are ready, but emotionally something shifts. Their breathing becomes shallower. Their thoughts accelerate. Their awareness turns inward. They begin monitoring themselves, monitoring their voice, monitoring their posture, monitoring their performance. This internal monitoring creates tension, and tension alters behavior. Not dramatically, not obviously, but subtly, enough to change perception. Anxiety is not simply an emotion. It is a physiological state. It activates the nervous system. It prepares the body for threat. Even when no threat exists, the interview becomes perceived as danger. Not physical danger, but psychological danger. The danger of rejection, the danger of judgment, the danger of failure. The nervous system does not distinguish between physical threat and social threat. It activates the same protective mechanisms. Heart rate increases. Breathing becomes irregular. Muscle tension increases. Cognitive processing becomes less fluid. This state was designed for survival, not performance. Because survival prioritizes speed, performance requires stability. Speed produces reaction. Stability produces control. Anxiety shifts the brain into reactive mode. Reactive mode weakens authority. Authority requires emotional regulation. Most candidates do not recognize how anxiety alters their behavior. They believe their words remain the same, but their delivery changes, their pacing changes, their tone changes, their presence changes. Presence communicates emotional state more powerfully than words. The interviewer senses this shift immediately, not consciously, but emotionally. The nervous system detects instability automatically. Instability creates uncertainty. Uncertainty weakens trust. Trust determines hiring decisions. Anxiety also narrows cognitive flexibility. When calm, the brain operates in an open state. It processes information clearly. It responds deliberately. It remains adaptive. But when anxious, the brain becomes defensive. It seeks safety. It seeks certainty. It seeks to avoid mistakes. This defensive state reduces natural expression. Responses become rigid. Speech becomes less fluid. Authenticity disappears. Authenticity creates connection. Connection creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. Anxiety interrupts this chain. Another subtle effect of anxiety is urgency. Anxious candidates feel compelled to respond immediately. Silence becomes uncomfortable. They rush to fill it. But rushing weakens authority, because authority does not rush. Authority allows silence. Silence signals emotional control. Emotional control signals competence. Competence signals higher ability. Anxiety removes silence. It replaces silence with reactive speech. Reactive speech signals emotional dependence. Dependence weakens authority. Calm candidates tolerate silence comfortably. This tolerance signals internal stability. Stability commands respect. Respect influences decision. Anxiety also creates approval, seeking behavior. Approval, seeking shifts focus outward. Instead of expressing certainty, the candidate seeks validation. They adjust their answers to please the interviewer. They monitor reactions constantly. They attempt to avoid disapproval. This behavior signals emotional dependency. Dependency weakens perceived strength. Strength attracts trust. Trust attracts opportunity. Anxiety disrupts this process. There is another hidden effect. Anxiety disconnects you from the present moment. Attention shifts into self-monitoring. Instead of observing the interviewer clearly, the candidate observes themselves. This self-focus reduces awareness. Reduced awareness weakens adaptability. Adaptability signals competence. Competence signals reliability. Reliability signals higher ability. Calm candidates remain externally focused. They observe the interviewer. They observe the environment. They remain present. Presence communicates confidence. Confidence creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. Anxiety also creates micro-expressions, small involuntary facial expressions, brief flashes of uncertainty. These expressions occur too quickly to control consciously, but they are detected subconsciously. They influence emotional perception. Perception shapes outcome, even when words are correct, because emotional signals outweigh logical content. This is why preparation alone is insufficient. Preparation addresses logic. Anxiety disrupts psychology. Interview mastery requires emotional preparation, not just informational preparation. You must regulate your internal state, because your internal state determines your external signals. External signals determine perception. Perception determines outcome. The calm candidate does not eliminate anxiety completely. They regulate it. They allow it to exist without being controlled by it. They remain grounded. They remain present. They remain stable. This stability creates psychological advantage, because stability signals competence. Competence signals trustworthiness. Trustworthiness signals higher ability. Anxiety sabotages candidates silently, not by removing their knowledge, but by altering their signals. Signals that determine how they are perceived. Signals that determine whether they are trusted. Signals that determine whether they are chosen. Mastery is not the absence of anxiety. Mastery is control over your response to anxiety, because the candidate who controls their internal state controls how they are perceived, and the candidate who controls perception controls their opportunity. Chapter 6. How to control your internal state before the interview begins. Interview success does not begin in the interview room. It begins long before you arrive. It begins in your internal state, because by the time you sit down, your nervous system has already established your psychological baseline, and this baseline determines everything that follows. Most candidates prepare externally. They study the company. They review their experience. They rehearse answers. But they neglect the most important preparation, their emotional state. Because your emotional state becomes your psychological foundation, and your foundation determines your stability under pressure. If your internal state is unstable before the interview begins, The interview will amplify that instability. Pressure exposes what already exists. It does not create it. This is why internal preparation is critical, because you cannot fake emotional stability under pressure. Pressure removes performance. Pressure reveals reality. The calm candidate does not become calm during the interview. They arrive calm. They establish stability before entering the environment. This stability protects them, because emotional stability is easier to maintain than to create under pressure. Most candidates enter interviews with elevated nervous system activation. They interpret this activation as danger. Their thoughts accelerate. Their breathing becomes shallow. Their body prepares for threat, even though no threat exists. This activation alters perception. They begin seeing the interviewer as a judge rather than a collaborator. This perception creates psychological imbalance. They feel subordinate. Subordination weakens authority. Authority requires internal equality, not arrogance, but psychological stability. You must enter the interview from a position of internal control, not emotional dependency, because emotional dependency creates approval-seeking behavior. Approval-seeking weakens perceived strength. Strength creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. Controlling your internal state begins with awareness. You must recognize that anxiety is not danger. It is activation. Activation is energy. Energy can be regulated. Energy can be directed, but it must not control you. Most candidates attempt to eliminate anxiety completely. This is unnecessary. The goal is not elimination. The goal is regulation. Regulation creates stability. Stability creates clarity. Clarity creates authority. Authority shapes perception. Perception determines outcome. One of the most powerful tools for regulating your internal state is slowing your physiological tempo. Your nervous system and your body are connected. When your body slows, your nervous system follows. When your breathing slows, your emotional state stabilizes. When your movements slow, your mind becomes calmer. Most anxious candidates move quickly. They walk quickly. They breathe quickly. They think quickly. Speed reinforces activation. Activation reinforces anxiety. Slowing your physical state interrupts this cycle. It signals safety to your nervous system. Safety reduces activation. Reduced activation restores clarity. Clarity restores control. Control restores authority. Authority changes perception. You must also shift your psychological frame. Most candidates enter interviews believing they must prove their worth. This creates psychological inferiority. Inferiority weakens authority. Authority requires internal equality. You are not entering to beg for opportunity. You are entering to evaluate mutual fit. This shift removes psychological dependency. Dependency creates anxiety. Independence creates stability. Stability creates confidence. Confidence influences perception. Perception influences decision. You must detach your identity from the outcome. Most candidates attach their self-worth to interview success. This creates emotional vulnerability. Vulnerability creates fear. Fear creates reactive behavior. Reactive behavior weakens authority. The calm candidate does not attach their identity to the outcome. They remain internally stable, regardless of the result. This stability protects their emotional state. Protected emotional state creates psychological advantage because emotional independence signals strength. Strength attracts trust. Trust influences hiring decisions. Another critical factor is mental rehearsal, not rehearsing answers, but rehearsing emotional stability. Visualize yourself entering calmly. Visualize yourself responding deliberately. Visualize yourself remaining stable during difficult questions. This mental rehearsal trains your nervous system. The nervous system does not distinguish fully between imagination and experience. It learns from both. Mental rehearsal creates familiarity. Familiarity reduces uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty reduces anxiety. Reduced anxiety increases stability. Stability increases authority. Authority shapes perception. Perception shapes outcome. You must also eliminate urgency. Urgency creates emotional pressure. Pressure weakens authority. Authority requires internal spaciousness. You have time. You have control. You do not rush. Rushing signals dependency. Dependency weakens authority. Deliberate pacing signals internal control. Internal control signals competence. Competence signals higher ability. Your goal is not to perform. Your goal is to remain stable. Performance emerges naturally from stability. Stability allows clarity. Clarity allows authentic expression. Authentic expression creates trust. Trust determines hiring decisions. Before entering the interview, your objective is simple. Establish internal calm. Establish internal control. Establish internal independence. Because once the interview begins, your internal state becomes visible externally. Visible through your presence. Visible through your pacing. Visible through your emotional signals. Signals that determine how you are perceived. Signals that determine whether you are trusted. Signals that determine whether you are chosen. Interview mastery begins before the interview begins, because the candidate who controls their internal state beforehand controls the interview itself. Chapter 7. How to answer questions without losing authority. Most candidates believe the interview is a test of answers. They believe success depends on saying the perfect thing, giving the perfect explanation, providing the perfect example, avoiding every mistake. But interview mastery is not about perfect answers. It is about controlled responses. Because answers do not create authority, delivery creates authority. And delivery is shaped by your internal state. The same answer can communicate strength or weakness, not because of the words themselves, but because of how they are delivered. Authority is not heard in vocabulary. Authority is felt in stability. Most candidates unknowingly surrender their authority when answering questions, not because they lack intelligence, but because they answer from emotional dependency. They answer to prove themselves. They answer to gain approval. They answer to avoid rejection. This psychological frame alters their delivery. Their tone becomes uncertain. Their pacing becomes rushed. Their explanations become excessive. Excessive explanation signals insecurity. Insecurity weakens authority. Authority does not over-explain. Authority communicates clearly and stops, because authority assumes its own value. Most candidates fear giving incomplete answers. They believe more words increase credibility, but more words often weaken credibility, because unnecessary words signal internal uncertainty. Certainty is efficient. Certainty communicates clearly and stops. This creates psychological weight. Weight creates influence. Influence creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. There is a critical distinction between reacting and responding. Reaction is impulsive. Response is controlled. Reaction is emotional. Response is deliberate. Most candidates react. They answer immediately. They attempt to eliminate silence. They attempt to reduce their discomfort quickly. But this urgency weakens authority. Authority does not rush. Authority allows space. Space signals emotional control. Emotional control signals competence. Competence signals higher ability. When asked a question, pause briefly, not artificially, but deliberately. This pause communicates thoughtfulness. Thoughtfulness communicates internal control. Internal control strengthens authority. Authority influences perception immediately. The interviewer perceives you differently, not because your answer changed, but because your stability changed. Your pause communicates that you are not controlled by pressure. You are in control of yourself. This creates psychological advantage. Another common mistake is over-defending weaknesses. When asked about challenges or failures, candidates attempt to protect their image aggressively. They justify excessively. They explain defensively. This behavior signals emotional vulnerability. Vulnerability weakens authority. Authority does not defend unnecessarily. Authority acknowledges calmly. Calm acknowledgement signals emotional strength. Strength creates trust. Trust influences hiring decisions. The calm candidate does not fear imperfection. They present it without emotional instability, because emotional stability communicates competence more powerfully than perfection. There is also the matter of tone. Tone reveals internal state, not consciously, but emotionally. Candidates who speak with strained tone signal anxiety. Candidates who speak with controlled tone signal stability. Stability strengthens authority. Authority strengthens influence. Influence strengthens hiring probability. Tone emerges naturally from internal calm. You cannot fake calm tone convincingly. It must originate internally. This is why internal state control is critical. Your emotional regulation shapes your vocal signals. Your vocal signals shape perception. Perception shapes outcome. Eye contact also. influences authority during responses, not forced eye contact, not constant eye contact, but calm, natural engagement. Eye contact signals presence. Presence signals confidence. Confidence signals competence. Competence signals higher ability. Avoid looking away immediately after answering. Allow your answer to exist. Allow silence. This silence reinforces authority. It communicates certainty. Certainty creates trust. Trust influences decision. Most candidates attempt to escape silence after answering. They add unnecessary words. They dilute their authority. Silence strengthens authority because silence signals emotional independence. Independence commands respect. Respect influences hiring decisions. Another powerful principle is emotional neutrality. Some questions are designed to create pressure. Unexpected questions, challenging questions, questions about weaknesses. These questions are not only informational, they are psychological tests. They test your emotional stability. Candidates who react emotionally weaken their authority. Candidates who remain calm strengthen their authority. Calm signals emotional resilience. Resilience signals competence. Competence signals reliability. Reliability signals higher ability. It is not necessary to know every answer immediately. It is necessary to remain stable. Stability protects your authority. Authority protects your influence. Influence protects your opportunity. Interview mastery is not about impressing the interviewer. It is about maintaining internal control, because internal control shapes external perception. External perception determines outcome. Your goal is not to perform perfectly. Your goal is to remain psychologically stable. From stability, clear answers emerge naturally. From stability, authority emerges naturally. From authority, trust emerges naturally, and trust determines hiring decisions. Because the candidate who answers from calm certainty is perceived as capable of handling pressure, and the candidate who appears capable under pressure is the candidate who gets hired. Chapter 8. The secret interview psychology employers wish you didn't know. There is something most employers will never say directly, not because it is malicious, not because it is unfair, but because it operates beneath conscious awareness. Most hiring decisions are not made purely on qualifications. They are made on emotional certainty. Before logic confirms the decision, emotion initiates it. The interviewer does not first decide based on your experience. They first decide based on how you make them feel. Do you make them feel confident? Do you make them feel calm? Do you make them feel certain? Or do you make them feel uncertain? Uncertainty creates hesitation. Hesitation prevents hiring. This process happens automatically. The interviewer may believe they are making a logical decision, but logic often justifies what emotion already decided. This is the hidden psychology. Because human beings trust emotional signals more than informational signals. Information can be exaggerated. Information can be rehearsed. Information can be manipulated. But emotional signals are harder to fake. The nervous system detects emotional stability automatically. It detects confidence. It detects anxiety. It detects certainty. It detects doubt. These signals shape perception instantly. The interviewer's nervous system is constantly asking one silent question: is this person safe to trust? Not safe physically, safe professionally, safe emotionally, safe in responsibility, safe in uncertainty. Safety is communicated through stability. Stability is communicated through calm. Calm creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. Most candidates believe interviews are designed to measure knowledge, but interviews are designed to measure reliability. Knowledge can be taught. Reliability cannot. Reliability is predicted through emotional stability. Because emotional stability predicts behavior under pressure, employers know pressure is inevitable. Deadlines, unexpected problems, responsibility, stress. They are not hiring the version of you that exists in comfort. They are hiring the version of you that exists under pressure. The interview is designed to reveal that version, not through obvious tests, but through subtle psychological observation. Unexpected questions are not random. They are deliberate. They create uncertainty. Uncertainty reveals emotional control. Candidates who remain calm signal reliability. Candidates who react emotionally signal vulnerability. Vulnerability creates perceived risk. Hiring decisions are fundamentally risk decisions. Employers are not choosing the best candidate. They are choosing the safest candidate, the candidate who appears most stable, The candidate who appears most reliable, the candidate who appears least likely to create future problems. This is why calm candidates are often chosen over more knowledgeable candidates, because calm communicates predictability. Predictability creates safety. Safety determines hiring decisions. There is another hidden psychological factor: emotional independence. Candidates who appear emotionally dependent create subconscious doubt. Dependency signals insecurity. Insecurity signals instability. Instability signals risk. Risk reduces hiring probability. Emotionally independent candidates appear stronger, not because they are arrogant, but because they are stable. They do not appear controlled by the interview. They appear in control of themselves. This creates authority. Authority influences perception automatically. Employers trust authority because authority signals competence. Competence signals reliability. Reliability signals hireability. Another hidden factor is emotional memory. The interviewer will not remember every answer you give, but they will remember how you made them feel. Emotional memory lasts longer than informational memory. If you create emotional certainty, you create memorability. Memorability increases hiring probability. Most candidates focus on informational memorability, trying to give impressive answers. But emotional memorability is more powerful. Calm candidates create emotional certainty. Certainty creates trust. Trust creates memorability. Memorability creates hiring decisions. Silence also plays a hidden role. Silence creates psychological space. Space creates authority. Authority increases perceived competence. Most candidates rush to fill silence. They weaken their authority. Calm candidates allow silence. Silence strengthens authority. Authority strengthens influence. Influence strengthens hiring probability. There is also the principle of emotional contagion. Your emotional state influences the interviewer's emotional state. If you are calm, they feel calm. If you are anxious, they feel subtle tension. People trust those who make them feel calm. Calm creates safety. Safety creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. Employers may not consciously recognize this process, but it shapes their decisions. They often justify their choice with logic afterward, but emotion made the decision first. This is the secret psychology. Interview mastery is not about convincing the interviewer. It is about regulating your internal state, because your internal state shapes their emotional perception. Their emotional perception shapes their decision. When you control your internal state, you control the emotional environment. When you control the emotional environment, you influence perception. When you influence perception, you influence outcome. This is the hidden advantage most candidates never discover. They focus on information. They ignore psychology. They prepare externally. They neglect internal stability. But internal stability is the true determinant. Because employers are not hiring your answers. They are hiring your nervous system. They are hiring your emotional stability. They are hiring your ability to remain calm in uncertainty. And the candidate who demonstrates that stability becomes the candidate who gets hired. Chapter 9. How to use silence to appear more confident and competent. Silence is one of the most misunderstood tools in an interview. Most candidates fear it. They interpret silence as failure. They interpret silence as awkwardness. They interpret silence as danger, and so they rush to eliminate it. They speak quickly. They fill every pause. They attempt to maintain constant verbal output because they believe speaking constantly creates confidence. But the opposite is true. Confidence is not demonstrated by constant speech. Confidence is demonstrated by comfort with silence, because silence reveals emotional stability, and emotional stability creates authority. The candidate who can remain calm in silence communicates something powerful. They communicate that they are not controlled by pressure. They communicate that they are not controlled by discomfort. They communicate internal control. Internal control signals competence. Competence signals hireability. Silence allows your nervous system to remain regulated. When you pause before answering, you create space. Space interrupts impulsive reaction. Space allows deliberate response. Deliberate response signals emotional discipline. Emotional discipline strengthens authority. Authority shapes perception immediately. The interviewer interprets your pause not as weakness, but as thoughtfulness. Thoughtfulness signals intelligence. Intelligence signals competence. Competence signals reliability. Reliability signals higher ability. Most candidates answer immediately because they are attempting to reduce their own anxiety. Their speech becomes self-soothing, but self-soothing speech weakens authority. Authority does not speak to relieve discomfort. Authority speaks deliberately. Authority allows silence. Silence communicates certainty. Certainty commands respect. Respect influences hiring decisions. There is a neurological reason silence creates confidence perception. The human brain associates calm pacing with competence. Fast, rushed speech is associated with anxiety. Slow, deliberate speech is associated with control. Control signals strength. Strength signals reliability. Reliability signals higher ability. Silence slows your pacing naturally. It stabilizes your delivery. It stabilizes your nervous system. It stabilizes your presence. This stability influences how your words are received. The same answer delivered with calm pauses appears more intelligent, more credible, more trustworthy, because emotional stability amplifies informational value. Without stability, information loses impact. Silence also shifts psychological power. The person comfortable with silence controls the interaction. Because most people fear silence, the person who does not fear it appears emotionally stronger. Emotional strength creates authority. Authority influences perception. Perception influences decision. When you answer a question, allow your answer to exist. Do not rush to add more words. Do not dilute your message. Let silence reinforce your certainty. This silence communicates confidence. Confidence communicates competence. Competence communicates higher ability. Silence also improves cognitive clarity. When you pause, your brain has time to organize thoughts. Your response becomes clearer, more structured, more precise. Precision signals intelligence. Intelligence signals competence. Competence signals trustworthiness. Trustworthiness signals higher ability. Candidates who rush often produce disorganized responses. Disorganization weakens perceived competence. Calm pacing strengthens perceived competence. Silence enables calm pacing. There is also the effect of perceived status. High-status individuals speak less. They do not attempt to prove themselves constantly. They allow their presence to communicate their value. This restraint creates psychological gravity. Gravity attracts attention. Attention increases perceived importance. Importance influences hiring decisions. Candidates who speak excessively appear lower status, not because of what they say, but because of how they say it. Excessive speech signals internal urgency. Urgency signals emotional dependency. Dependency weakens authority. Silence signals independence. Independence strengthens authority. Authority strengthens influence. Influence strengthens hiring probability. Silence also allows observation. When you are not speaking, you can observe the interviewer. You can observe their reactions, their tone, their emotional state. This awareness allows adaptive responses. Adaptability signals intelligence. Intelligence signals competence. Competence signals higher ability. Silence gives you control, because control begins with emotional regulation. Emotional regulation begins with restraint. Restraint creates stability. Stability creates authority. Authority creates trust. Trust creates opportunity. Most candidates use silence unconsciously. Powerful candidates use silence deliberately, not excessively, not artificially, but naturally, as a reflection of internal calm. Silence becomes part of their presence, part of their authority, part of their advantage, because the candidate who controls silence controls perception, and the candidate who controls perception controls the outcome. Chapter 10. How to make interviewers feel certain about hiring you. Every hiring decision ultimately comes down to one invisible factor: certainty. Not logical certainty, emotional certainty, because employers are not simply choosing the most qualified candidate. They are choosing the candidate they feel most certain about. Certainty removes hesitation. Certainty removes doubt. Certainty removes perceived risk. And hiring is fundamentally the act of reducing risk. When an interviewer chooses a candidate, they are making a psychological commitment. They are committing their reputation, their judgment, their trust. They must feel confident that choosing you is safe, not safe physically, safe professionally, safe emotionally, safe predictably. Certainty creates that safety. Most candidates attempt to create certainty through explanation. They attempt to convince the interviewer logically. They explain their experience, They explain their achievements. They explain their competence. But logic alone does not create certainty. Emotion creates certainty. Emotion shapes perception. Perception shapes trust. Trust shapes hiring decisions. The interviewer must feel that you are stable. Stable in uncertainty. Stable in pressure. Stable in responsibility, because responsibility inevitably creates stress. Employers are not hiring the version of you that exists in comfort. They are hiring the version of you that exists in challenge. The calm candidate creates emotional certainty, not because they claim competence, but because they embody stability. Stability signals reliability. Reliability signals trustworthiness. Trustworthiness signals higher ability. Most candidates unintentionally create emotional uncertainty, not through incorrect answers, but through emotional signals, rushed speech, approval, seeking tone, defensive explanations, subtle tension. These signals weaken certainty. Certainty cannot exist in instability. Certainty requires emotional consistency. Consistency signals reliability. Reliability signals higher ability. The calm candidate communicates consistency naturally. Their emotional state does not fluctuate dramatically. They remain grounded. They remain controlled. They remain present. This emotional consistency creates psychological reassurance. Reassurance strengthens trust. Trust strengthens hiring probability. There is also the factor of perceived future behavior. The interviewer is not only evaluating who you are now, they are imagining who you will be later, how you will behave under pressure, how you will respond to difficulty, how you will handle responsibility. Your current emotional signals shape this prediction. If you appear emotionally stable now, you are perceived as stable later. This perceived stability creates confidence. Confidence removes perceived risk. Reduced risk increases hiring probability. Another powerful factor is emotional memory. The interviewer will not remember every answer, but they will remember how they felt interacting with you. If you create emotional comfort, you create positive emotional memory. Positive emotional memory creates certainty. Certainty influences hiring decisions. Most candidates focus on informational memorability. They attempt to say impressive things, but emotional memorability is more powerful. Calm presence creates emotional comfort. Comfort creates trust. Trust creates certainty. Certainty creates hiring decisions. Silence also contributes to certainty. Silence communicates emotional control. Emotional control signals competence. Competence signals reliability. Reliability signals higher ability. Candidates who allow silence appear more confident, not because they speak less, but because they appear internally stable. Internal stability creates certainty. Certainty creates trust. Trust creates opportunity. Another hidden factor is emotional independence. Candidates who appear emotionally dependent create subconscious doubt. Dependency signals insecurity. Insecurity signals instability. Instability weakens certainty. Emotionally independent candidates appear self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency signals strength. Strength creates certainty. Certainty influences hiring decisions. You must also avoid trying to force certainty. Forced certainty appears artificial. Artificial behavior weakens trust. Trust requires authenticity. Authenticity emerges naturally from internal calm. Internal calm creates genuine stability. Genuine stability creates genuine certainty. Certainty must be felt, not performed. Because emotional signals cannot be convincingly faked, they must originate internally. Your goal is not to convince the interviewer. Your goal is to remain emotionally stable. Because emotional stability creates psychological certainty automatically. Certainty removes doubt. Removed doubt creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. Interview mastery is not about perfect answers. It is about creating emotional certainty. Because the candidate who makes the interviewer feel certain becomes the candidate who gets hired. Chapter 11. How to leave the interview with authority and psychological impact. Most candidates believe the interview ends when the final question is answered. They believe their performance is complete, their influence finished, their impression sealed. But the final moments of the interview are among the most powerful, because endings shape memory, and memory shapes decisions. The interviewer may forget specific answers. They may forget specific examples, but they will remember how the interaction felt overall, especially how it ended. The human brain gives disproportionate weight to the final emotional impression. This is known as emotional recency. The last emotional signal you transmit often becomes the dominant memory. Most candidates unintentionally weaken their authority in these final moments, not through incorrect words, but through emotional signals. Their internal stability collapses, their desire for approval resurfaces, their psychological independence disappears. They shift into emotional dependency. Subtle changes appear. Their tone becomes more tentative. Their posture becomes less grounded. Their presence becomes less stable. These changes signal uncertainty. Uncertainty weakens authority. Authority must be maintained until the very last moment. Not forced authority, but calm stability. Because stability preserves the perception created throughout the interview, most candidates unconsciously communicate relief when the interview ends. Relief signals emotional pressure. Pressure signals dependency. Dependency weakens perceived strength. Strength attracts trust. Trust influences hiring decisions. The calm candidate does not display relief, not because they suppress emotion artificially, but because their internal stability remains intact. They were never controlled by the pressure. They remain emotionally grounded. From beginning to end, this consistency reinforces trust. Trust strengthens hiring probability. There is also the matter of psychological closure. The interviewer must feel emotional completeness, not informational completeness. Emotional completeness. This completeness comes from stability, from calm, from presence. The candidate who leaves calmly creates a lasting impression of competence, not because they said more, but because they remained stable until the end. Another powerful factor is pacing. Most candidates rush the ending. They gather their belongings quickly. They move quickly. They attempt to exit efficiently. But urgency weakens authority. Authority does not rush. Authority maintains deliberate pacing. Deliberate pacing signals internal control. Internal control signals competence. Competence signals hireability. Your final movements communicate as much as your final words. Your posture communicates. Your pacing communicates. Your emotional signals communicate. These signals shape emotional memory. Emotional memory shapes hiring decisions. Silence also plays a role in the ending. Allow moments of calm. Do not rush to fill every second. Calm silence reinforces emotional stability. Emotional stability reinforces authority. Authority reinforces trust. Trust influences decision. Eye contact during the final moments also strengthens impact. Not forced eye contact, not prolonged unnecessarily, but calm, natural connection. This connection reinforces emotional presence. Presence strengthens memorability. Memorability strengthens hiring probability. Most candidates unintentionally weaken their final impression by seeking reassurance. They look for signals of approval. They attempt to interpret the interviewer's reaction. This creates emotional dependency. Dependency weakens authority. Authority does not seek reassurance. Authority remains internally stable regardless of external signals. This stability reinforces trust. Trust strengthens hiring probability. There is also the principle of psychological afterimage. Just as visual images linger after they disappear, emotional impressions linger after interactions end. Your final emotional state becomes the afterimage. If your final state is calm and stable, that stability lingers in the interviewer's memory. If your final state is anxious or uncertain, that instability lingers instead. This afterimage influences decision, often unconsciously. This is why maintaining emotional control until the very end is essential, not as performance, but as embodiment. Embodiment of calm, embodiment of internal control, embodiment of stability, because stability creates psychological certainty. Certainty creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. The calm candidate leaves without emotional urgency, without emotional dependency, without emotional instability. They leave with the same calm presence they entered with. This consistency reinforces authority. Authority reinforces trust. Trust reinforces hiring probability. Interview mastery does not end when the interview ends. Its influence continues in memory. And the candidate who leaves with calm authority becomes the candidate remembered with confidence. And the candidate remembered with confidence becomes the candidate who gets hired. Chapter 12. Becoming the candidate employers instinctively trust. There is a level of interview mastery most candidates never reach, not because it is impossible, but because they never realize it exists. It is the level where effort disappears, where performance disappears, where persuasion disappears, and what remains is presence. At this level, The candidate is not trying to convince anyone. They are not trying to impress. They are not trying to prove their worth. They are simply stable, completely stable, because trust is not created through effort. Trust is created through certainty, and certainty is created through emotional stability. Employers instinctively trust candidates who appear internally grounded, not because those candidates claim competence, but because they embody control. Control over emotion, control over reaction, control over pressure. This control communicates something deeper than words. It communicates reliability. Reliability creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. Most candidates enter interviews with internal conflict. Part of them wants to appear confident. Part of them fears rejection. This internal conflict creates instability. Instability weakens authority. Authority requires internal alignment. Alignment creates clarity. Clarity creates calm. Calm creates trust. The trusted candidate is not free from uncertainty. They simply do not react to uncertainty emotionally. They remain present. They remain grounded. They remain stable. This stability communicates emotional resilience. Resilience signals competence. Competence signals reliability. Reliability signals hireability. Trust is not logical, it is emotional. The interviewer must feel that you can be relied upon, not just believe it intellectually. Feel it instinctively. Instinctive trust emerges from emotional signals. Signals of calm, signals of control, signals of internal independence. Emotionally independent candidates do not appear controlled by the outcome. They are not emotionally dependent on being chosen. This independence creates psychological strength. Strength creates authority. Authority creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. Most candidates unknowingly communicate emotional dependency. Their nervous system seeks approval. Their behavior reflects uncertainty. This uncertainty weakens perceived reliability. Reliability cannot exist in emotional instability. Stability creates reliability. Reliability creates trust. Trust creates opportunity. There is also the factor of predictability. Employers seek predictable emotional behavior, not predictable answers. Predictable stability, because emotional instability creates professional risk. Emotional stability creates professional safety. Safety influences hiring decisions. The trusted candidate communicates emotional predictability. Their calm remains consistent. Their presence remains grounded. Their emotional state remains regulated. This consistency reassures the interviewer. Reassurance creates confidence. Confidence creates hiring decisions. Another powerful factor is emotional containment. Emotionally contained individuals do not leak anxiety. They do not leak urgency. They do not leak dependency. They remain internally composed. This composure signals strength. Strength attracts trust. Trust attracts opportunity. The trusted candidate also appears internally sufficient. They do not appear incomplete without the job. They do not appear emotionally dependent on the outcome. This independence signals self-worth. Self-worth signals confidence. Confidence signals competence. Competence signals hireability. This does not mean detachment from caring. It means detachment from emotional dependency. You care about the opportunity, but your identity does not depend on it. This independence protects your emotional stability. Protected stability strengthens your authority. Authority strengthens trust. Trust strengthens hiring probability. The trusted candidate also remains present, not trapped in future outcomes. Not trapped in past performance. Present. Presence creates clarity. Clarity creates control. Control creates calm. Calm creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. Interview mastery is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming internally stable. Stable enough that pressure does not control you. Stable enough that uncertainty does not destabilize you. Stable enough that your emotional signals communicate certainty naturally. This stability transforms how you are perceived, not artificially, but authentically. Authentic stability cannot be faked. It must be developed through awareness, through emotional regulation, through internal control. Because employers are not hiring your answers. They are hiring your nervous system. They are hiring your emotional stability. They are hiring your ability to remain calm in uncertainty. The candidate who embodies this stability becomes instinctively trusted, not because they demanded trust, but because they communicated safety. Safety creates certainty. Certainty creates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. This is interview mastery, not mastering answers, but mastering yourself. Because the candidate who controls themselves becomes the candidate employer's trust, and the candidate employer's trust becomes the candidate who gets hired. Conclusion: the psychology that separates those who are chosen from those who are rejected. By now you understand something most candidates never realize. Interview success is not determined by what you know alone. It is determined by what you communicate without speaking. It is determined by your emotional stability, your internal control, your ability to remain calm when uncertainty appears. Because interviews are not logical evaluations first. They are psychological evaluations first. Before your answers are analyzed, your emotional signals are interpreted. Before your qualifications are considered, your stability is felt. Before your competence is measured, your presence is observed. Most candidates never recognize this. They prepare their answers. They rehearse their experience. They study external information, but they neglect internal preparation. And internal preparation determines external perception. Perception determines outcome, because employers are not simply choosing the most qualified candidate. They are choosing the candidate they trust. Trust is not created through perfection. Trust is created through certainty. Certainty is created through emotional stability. The calm candidate creates certainty naturally, not because they try harder, but because they remain stable. Stable in silence. Stable in uncertainty. Stable under observation. This stability communicates reliability. Reliability communicates safety. Safety communicates trust. Trust creates hiring decisions. This process is invisible, but it is powerful. It shapes outcomes quietly. It determines who is remembered, who is trusted, who is chosen. Most candidates attempt to influence through effort. They try to impress. They try to persuade. They try to eliminate doubt through explanation. But true influence does not come from effort. It comes from control. Control over your internal state. Because when you control your internal state, you control your emotional signals. When you control your emotional signals, you control perception. When you control perception, you influence decision. Interview mastery is not about becoming someone artificial. It is about becoming internally stable. Stable enough that pressure does not destabilize you. Stable enough that silence does not intimidate you. Stable enough that uncertainty does not control you. This stability creates presence. Presence creates authority. Authority creates trust. Trust creates opportunity. From this moment forward, every interview becomes different. Not because the questions change, but because you change. You no longer enter with emotional dependency. You no longer enter seeking approval. You enter stable. You enter grounded. You enter in control. You allow silence. You allow presence. You allow certainty to emerge naturally. This certainty shapes how you are perceived, and perception shapes your opportunity. Because employers are not hiring the candidate who tries hardest to impress them, they are hiring the candidate who appears most capable of handling pressure, most capable of remaining stable, most capable of being trusted. And trust begins internally. It begins with emotional control. It begins with calm. It begins with stability. This is interview mastery, not mastery of answers, but mastery of yourself. Because the candidate who masters their internal state masters the interview, and the candidate who masters the interview masters their opportunity. You have just finished listening to Interview Mastery, The Hidden Psychology of Getting Hired, written by Audiobook Mantra. This audiobook was not designed to give you rehearsed answers. It was designed to give you something far more powerful. Control. Control over your internal state. Control over your emotional signals. Control over how you are perceived. Because interview mastery is not about saying the perfect words. It is about becoming the person whose presence communicates certainty. Certainty that cannot be shaken by pressure. Certainty that does not depend on approval. Certainty that exists before you speak. From this moment forward, every interview you enter will feel different. Not because the questions have changed, but because you have changed. You now understand the invisible forces that shape hiring decisions. You understand how calm creates trust, how silence creates authority, how emotional stability creates certainty, and how certainty creates opportunity. These principles extend beyond interviews. They shape how you are perceived in every professional interaction, every conversation, every moment where your presence is observed. Because the ability to remain calm under pressure is not just an interview skill, it is a life skill, it is a leadership skill, it is a mastery skill. Continue developing this internal stability. Continue strengthening your emotional control, because mastery is not achieved in a single moment. It is developed through awareness, through discipline, through embodiment. Thank you for listening to Interview Mastery, The Hidden Psychology of Getting Hired, written by Audiobook Mantra. And remember, the person who remains calm under pressure is the person who is trusted, and the person who is trusted is the person who is chosen.